Hello, just a quick one for you today. So a few people have told me that they find the criticisms of the cosmological argument a little bit tricky to understand, which is fair enough because they're not dead straightforward. So I'm going to take you through them in a nice, quick little video. So remember, your two main critics for this argument are Bertrand Russell and David Hume, and they're criticising Thomas Aquinas. So that's the version of the argument we're going to look at, but it's the criticism of Aquinas' third way. So first of all, you probably know a little bit about Russell versus Copleston. This was a very famous radio debate. So Russell was an atheist philosopher, so he was taking the side of arguing that the cosmological argument is no good. Copleston was a Jesuit priest, a Christian priest, so he was defending the argument. The most famous quote from the debate was Russell saying, "I should say that the universe is just there and that's all." That's probably the criticism that's easiest to remember of the cosmological argument. So as we go through, I want you to think about, do you agree with that? Do you agree that the universe is just there? It doesn't require an explanation. All right, so Russell started out criticising Aquinas by saying that he's doing the fallacy of composition. Now, a fallacy is when there's a logical problem or a philosophical problem with what you've said. It's kind of like a hole in your argument. So Russell thinks that Aquinas is trying to say that what's true of the parts of something is therefore true of the whole, but this isn't necessarily true. So Aquinas says everything in the universe is contingent, so therefore the universe must be contingent too. Therefore, we need a necessary being to create it, and this Aquinas thinks is God. Russell doesn't like that. He says that's like saying every person in the universe has a mother, therefore the universe itself has a mother. Now we can see that that isn't true. The idea of the universe having a mother doesn't really make sense. But the thing is, Russell's not necessarily right that Aquinas has committed a fallacy here, because sometimes what's true of the part is true of the whole. It depends on what you're talking about. So we've got a couple of examples here. The wall is made of small bricks, therefore the wall is small. That does commit the fallacy of composition. That's a problem because the wall might not be small. But if we say the wall is made of bricks, therefore the wall is brick, that's fine. There's no logical fallacy there. And equally, we could say each of the 50 US states is in the Northern Hemisphere, therefore the whole of the US is in the Northern Hemisphere. Again, what's true of the parts is true of the whole. So Aquinas might be committing a fallacy, but we don't know for sure because we don't know enough about the thing he's talking about. We can't tell enough about the universe to know for sure what it's made up of and therefore whether he's doing a fallacy or not. So it's a fair criticism from Russell, but we don't know for sure that it's right. Now, Hume and Russell both felt that there was a problem with Aquinas arguing that God was a necessary being. They don't think that he was. So Hume's take on this is like this. Any being that exists could also not exist. So that could apply to you or me or anything really. There's no logical contradiction in thinking any being does not exist. So even if there's something that I know exists, like the cup of tea I'm drinking now, I could imagine it not existing, and I could do that with anything. So there's no logical problem there. It's also true of God. So there's no logical problem with saying God does not exist. We can imagine that. So therefore, Hume thinks Aquinas is wrong to say God must have necessary existence. So just to unpack Hume a little bit here, Hume's an empiricist. That means he thinks we should only trust empirical evidence, basically sense experience. So how would you know if unicorns existed? According to Hume, you'd have to have seen one, you'd have to have touched one, gone up to one, been sure that what you were seeing was a unicorn. You couldn't just take someone's word for it. Hume therefore thinks Aquinas is wrong to say that the existence of God is logically necessary, because Hume doesn't think we can say that about anything. Anything we can imagine not existing. So nothing's logically necessary for Hume. So 2 plus 2 is 4. That's a logical statement. That's an analytic statement. We don't need anything else to prove that. But if we're talking about a person like Krish existing, that's a synthetic statement. To know if Krish existed, we'd have to meet him in order to be sure. But again, Hume's not necessarily right. Aquinas probably wasn't talking about logical necessity, which is what Hume thinks he is talking about. He was probably talking about God being metaphysically necessary. Now, you don't need a huge amount on this for the exam. All you need to know is that Aquinas wasn't saying God has to exist in the same way as 2 plus 2 has to be 4. He was just saying that contingent things, so all the things around us, require an explanation in terms of a necessary being that was not caused by anything else. So this is a little bit like the first cause argument. And for him, that's part of the nature of God. So if God exists, God has to be a necessary being that causes contingent beings. So maybe Hume's criticism isn't as strong as it looks here, but that doesn't mean it's completely invalid. And the reason it might not be completely invalid is because Aquinas might be making the same error that Paley did by making too big of a jump, by assuming that the existence of a designer meant the God of classical theism must exist. That was Paley's possible mistake. Aquinas might be doing the same thing. He might be right to say that we need a necessary being in order to explain the existence of contingent beings, but that doesn't mean it has to be God. It doesn't mean it has to be the Christian God. And of course, he's saying that it is the Christian God. So again, back to Hume. He thought, okay, Aquinas has got a point about necessary beings, but why does the necessary being have to be God? Why can't the universe itself be a necessary being? So if you're familiar with Occam's razor, this is a principle in philosophy that says that the simplest explanation is the one that's most likely to be true. So Hume thinks we can kind of Occam's razor this one. It's simpler to assume that all the matter of the universe has always existed than to imagine that there's a God that brought it all into being. It's simpler to imagine the universe as the necessary being than it is to go to this idea of God. Now, Hume's on to something here, but even if it's right, it would still mean that the matter of the universe, so all the stuff that makes up the universe, was a caused necessary being. And Aquinas is convinced that an uncaused necessary being is needed. So in other words, Hume's argument about why isn't the universe the necessary being, it doesn't answer the major question, which is it doesn't explain why there is anything at all. Saying that the universe itself is a necessary being doesn't get us any closer to understanding why the universe even exists. Now, again, we can flip the Occam's razor thing here and say that the simplest answer to that question is that there is a God who created it. So Occam's razor is one of those principles that can go both ways. Okay, so we're nearly there. Here's the one that we talked about at the beginning, Russell's brute fact. He thinks that the simplest explanation is just no explanation at all. We don't need one for the universe. It's just there. And that's it. This is what he said to Copleston in the radio debate. And if he's right, then there's no need to bring God into the explanation. There's no need to go to an idea of God. But there's problems with this. He's probably not right because it goes against all our experience. Everything we know from science tells us that events are caused, things have reasons. Science doesn't work if there are just brute facts, because a major principle of science is that we look for and we find explanations. So I've got that for you here. If things in the universe have explanations, so if they're not brute facts, why would the universe itself be a brute fact? It doesn't seem to make any sense. Okay, so that's just my little quick tour of the criticisms of the cosmological argument for you. Hopefully that's nice and clear, and you can use this to add to your notes, add to your understanding. If you have any difficulties, talk to your RS teacher, they'll help you out. Hope you've enjoyed the video. Check out my others, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you soon.